So let's start out this morning by just sitting together. You may close your eyes if you'd like. Just listen. Just let yourself be a receiver. And I'm going to read a poem to you called I Surrender by Sri Shimnoy, who was an Indian spiritual teacher. And this is what he says: I surrender to joy because joy is power. I surrender to love because love is power sublime. I surrender to oneness because oneness is the measureless power. I surrender to God because God is the absolute power supreme. And then let's listen to what Isaiah says in chapter 30, verse 15. In returning and in rest you shall be saved. In quietness and in trust shall be your strength. In returning and in rest you shall be saved. In quietness and in trust shall be your strength. And then in Matthew 11:28, this is what Jesus, our way shower, said. Come to me, all you who are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. As you listened to these three different teachers, all speaking about returning and resting and letting be and surrender, could you begin to feel yourself letting go in a somewhat different way? Maybe in a way that you would have called it surrender. And then take a minute and think, what does surrender mean to you? Does it mean giving up like, oh, I just give up? Or like my mother would say, oh, well, a victim type of surrender. A surrender where you feel like you are not getting what you had hoped out of life. Or a kind of surrender like an army does when they've been beaten. And they surrender knowing that there's no place else that they can go. It's a kind of surrender where there is always loss involved. Is that what surrender means to you? Or does surrender mean something different? Is it an empowering thing where you let go simply because you know that you're not able to handle or do something on your own? It could be simply surrendering to somebody who has a different set of skills than you do. Like, I know nothing about taking care of my car. So I have to surrender and give that skill that I don't have over to somebody that has a higher skill, and I take my car to a mechanic. When I'm having a health issue or a relationship issue, when I'm coming from my highest self, that consciousness that is my God self within, I surrender to God, to the universe, to a higher power, whatever you choose to call, that lives within us, that is always sustaining us, that is always there. In returning and in rest, you will be saved. In quietness and in trust will be your strength. When I was a little girl, my dad used to tickle us kids unmercifully. And we knew that the only way that Dad would stop tickling was to yell, "Uncle!" We had to learn, if we did not want to be tickled until we either started crying or had an accident, that we had to call Uncle. And my dad was a good higher power. He would stop tickling. But nonetheless, my sister and brother and I had to surrender. We had to surrender our control over not being able to be tickled any longer. And then Dad stopped. When Isaiah spoke his words, and then 700 years later, when Jesus spoke his words, Israel was in a state of both political and social turmoil and unrest. And when Isaiah spoke the words, in returning and in rest, they fell on deaf ears, and the consequences were dire. However, it didn't stop there. Isaiah didn't say, "I told you so." He said, "You shall be saved." Now in Unity, we know that to be saved means to change your mind, to choose again. And so the armies that were fighting at the time had an opportunity to make another choice, because Isaiah was assuring them that God was always with them. And then about 700 years later, when Jesus was speaking to the throngs, it was also a time where the people were tired. The nation had been in unrest for far too long. And Jesus' words were words of compassion. They were words of caring. They were telling the people, God, your Father, is always with you. Listen to me. Let me teach you that when you turn within, you will have everything that you need. Maybe not everything that you want, but certainly everything that you need. And that's what comes to us when we turn within. What Jesus and Isaiah were saying is, let it be. Sometimes I know that my congregants would come to me, and when we use those words, let go and let God, people say, well, what does that mean? How do I just let go and let God? I like the words, let it be. If we let it be, we are not resisting. We are living with that true faith that our higher power does live within us. And although we do not have very much control about what happens in our outer world, we do have the control of what happens to us in our inner spiritual self, because as Unity Truth students, we have the tools. We know how to turn within. And in times of strife, we can't always do it by ourselves. And so we go to our minister, Carla, or we go to our prayer practitioner and our new almost LUT, Lisa. Sometimes we go to a counselor so that we can learn to let go or just let it be. Most of us here, not you two, but the rest of us probably remember in the 70s and 80s, the Guru Ram Dass. And Ram Dass told a story about how to catch a monkey in India. And he said, what you do is you put nuts in the bottom of a jar that has a small neck on it. And then he explained that the monkey puts its hand down into the jar and it grabs hold of the nuts. And it can't pull them out because it will not release and let go. And so the monkey is caught. And all this monkey needed to do was to release his fist or her fist, and their hand could come right out of that jar, and they would be free. And I think about it, aren't we sometimes a lot like that monkey? We hold on so tightly because we're afraid if we let go that we're not going to have what we want or what we think that we need. It sounds simple, doesn't it? Just open your hand, let go. Open your heart. Let it all be. But we know that while all of the principles that we live sound simple, they are not easy. Oh, in the best of times, they're very easy. It is very easy to believe that God is all and God is good when things are going great, isn't it? It's very wonderful to recognize that we are expressions of God when we're feeling good about ourselves, or that we co-create our life with Spirit when it's going the way we'd like to see it. And then we remember, oh yeah, I'm supposed to turn into prayer and meditation where I connect with Spirit. We know all of those things. But unless we take our fifth principle, it's not enough to know the principles. We have to walk our talk. As they say in religious science, treat and shuffle your feet. Get your feet moving on what you know so that we are living the principles, and that's when it's hard. That is when we have to live with faith. So let's look at surrender in letting go and letting God, in letting it be. Not as a powerless feeling, like I don't quite know enough or I'm not able to do it on my own. That's our egos talking. What we have to remember is that when we live from our highest self, that to let it be, to trust in Spirit, is empowering. We do not have to struggle. We do not have to strain. Does it mean we're not challenged? Of course not. In this human existence, we are always challenged. But we don't need to be overwhelmed with our challenges because we have that support from that strong inner spirit that we all live with. I'm sure, Carla, when you experienced some of the pain that you're feeling, when you were diagnosed with your diagnosis, it just took every ounce of energy you had to live the principles, and yet you know that's what carries you through. All of us, when we face our challenges in life, are given the opportunity to rise to our highest and to our best, and letting things be, not accepting them with an, oh well, poor me attitude, but with the knowingness that we are supported. Think of all of the love in this community. Think of the love that comes your way when you call silent unity, or when you reach out to someone that you dearly love and trust. There is more support than you can imagine. Too often, from our human selves, we believe that our security comes from our homes, from our bank accounts, from the jobs that we hold, from our relationships. And at some point, something happens in most of our lives where we recognize that all of this is temporary, that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, and everything that we experience in life will come and go. I have to drive down a beautiful street. I don't have to. I get to drive down a beautiful street to get to my new home. And I was gone all last week. And when I came home, I noticed that the trees were almost all brown and that the leaves had begun to fall. And I thought about the seasons and how that happens in our lives, how we have the seasons of spring and of summer, and then in fall and winter. And sometimes at the end of our winter season, there's the physical death of our body. But we know that that is just the transition to the next adventure of life. We surrender. We take our hand out of the jar. We open up and we let things be. This takes enormous faith. It takes our power of strength and our power of will. It gives us the opportunity to use our power of imagination in perhaps a greater way than we ever have. What can I envision? I love to talk about the great unmanifest. I call it the great soup that's up here, that is surrounding us all the time, that has every thought, every idea that has ever been thought or ever will be thought. And our job is to just open ourselves and look up and say, yeah, I think I'll take this one. And let God manifest as that through us. And if it doesn't work, oh, okay, I get to change my mind. And another idea comes through us right here and right now. We use our powers of release and of elimination, which gives the space, the openness for the new to come in. New paths are revealed to us, paths that we may have never thought or maybe had been afraid to take. So we just dig down and we get the courage that it took for me to say, okay, it's time that okay, it's time to leave my friends whom I dearly love and move to a brand new community to live near my daughter. It takes faith that all is well. It takes the true knowingness, not just our beliefs, but the knowingness that God is with us. God is around us. God is in and through all that is. And sometimes what we forget is that God is right here, our God. And each of us in this room reflect that God differently from anyone else on the planet, because it is our unique gift and our unique way of expressing spirit. And each way is beautiful. Sometimes we look out there and say, well, that isn't a very beautiful way to express spirit. I have a friend who has been a minister, and she now has a prison ministry. And she has worked very closely with one man who committed some very serious crimes and was to be imprisoned for life. But because of his good behavior in prison, his sentence has been lessened. He is an amazing artist and an amazing writer. And none of that would have ever had the opportunity to express if he hadn't been arrested. And then if Mary in her prison ministry hadn't connected with him, we would never say, well, this young man chose to go to prison for life. He would never say that. And yet the gifts that have come forth. So as we look at our lives in retrospect, and we see those things that perhaps we've thought were not in our best interest, we can see that they've brought us to where we are today. And in the growth that each of us in this room has taken on this spiritual path, we know that we are always rising into our highest and best consciousness. Probably most of you remember the words of John Denver's song, "Sweet, sweet surrender, live life without care, like the fish in the water, like the birds in the air." I think that was John Denver's way of saying what Jesus, our way shower, told us when he said, "Our Father takes care of the birds in the air and the lilies of the field. How much more will he take care of you?" So this week, together, all of you as my new friends, let us know that we're going to be working together to surrender and let be. When something comes up during the week and you may begin to feel yourself struggling, remember us sitting here this morning. See, I know how to do that. I can let it be. And you can know that that's the work I'm going to be doing this week too. And we are not alone. We will be doing all of that together. And as we do that, we are shining that light of Christ, and others see it, and they respond, and that assists them then in becoming their highest and best selves. Thank you for this morning. Thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to be here.